Okay, one more for today. This is Isaiah 6. This is actually the beginning of Isaiah's ministry. Chronologically, this would have been the first thing that would have happened of all the stuff in the book of Isaiah, because this is when he gets his call to be a prophet of God. So chronologically, we should put this before Isaiah 1. But he puts it here. Okay, so we know from the very beginning that this book is not arranged chronologically. I think he put this, I think the reason why he put this one, okay, so in chapter 7, when we get done with this material here, we're going to move on to another section. And in chapter 7 through, I think, 12, deal with another, that's another unit of thought. So that's going to be like another section of material. So from Isaiah 1:1 until now, we've been kind of dealing with one side, which is basically like Isaiah's opening statement. You know, the opening prologue to his 66 chapter long book. I think he did, I believe he didn't start, now again, there's no proof of this. I have no way of like proving this. But trying to figure out like why Isaiah didn't put the account of his call first. Now Jeremiah does. When we get to Jeremiah, he will give us the account of his call too, like Isaiah does. And he will actually put that first. Now Isaiah does give us more chronological markers than Isaiah does. Well, he doesn't necessarily arrange his material according to those chronological markers, but he does give us them. At least one Isaiah does, so certainly one Isaiah does. But Jeremiah does actually put his call first. Jeremiah 1 is about the call of Jeremiah to be a prophet of God. Isaiah doesn't. Okay. But I believe he put it here after the material that he's already written. Because he starts off by getting our attention about his message, the vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which starts off with an indictment of the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and then goes into this imagery of, you know, the vineyard and the branch and all the stuff we just got done reading, the mountain of the Lord and all that. That's like his opening statement. And now he closes that off. This, I believe, chapters 1 through 6 are all part of one block of thought. He closes that off by giving us an account of his call, which authorizes him to say this. So he just got done talking about what's going to happen to Judah and Jerusalem on account of the people's sin and exhorting them to turn away from that sin and go back to God. And now he is demonstrating where he gets the authority to say this from by giving us the account of his call. For some reason he decided that it would be more effective to put this after his opening statement of exhortations and judgment and deliverance instead of before. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. I don't know where Isaiah was when he saw this. He seems to be at least in or at least around the temple. Again, that would seem to indicate he's a priest, but the rest of whatever we can glean from his biographical information, which isn't much, would seem to indicate he was a member of the house of nobility, which would mean he was not a priest, because these two things were separate family lines that could not intersect or overlap. So I don't know. Maybe he was just there to offer a sacrifice. Maybe he was there to count something officially as part of the court. I just don't know. But he was somewhere in or around the temple when he had this vision of the Lord in the temple. And this is the year that King Uzziah, I'm assuming, has already died by this point, or at least he's about to. I don't know if he had a prolonged illness. He was living in his own house at the time. Remember, he was a leper and unclean person at the end of his life. Uzziah had been basically faithful, except for that incident of weakness and pride that resulted in him being outcast as a leper for his final years. So Isaiah had a very long reign. Okay, Isaiah had ultimately reigned overall for 52 years. I don't know how old Isaiah is here in Isaiah 6 when he gives the account of Uzziah's death, or beginning of his ministry, which happened the year of Uzziah's death. But he lived for 50 years plus himself after this, so he would have been a fairly young man here. Maybe in his 30s, or likely in his 20s. I don't think he would have been a teenager, although it's possible, because I believe Jeremiah was called as a teenager, and Daniel was taken as a captive as a teenager. So it's possible he may have been a teenager, although more likely a young man in his 20s. Who knows? We really don't know. But at any rate, the point here is that Uzziah had a long reign and died after 50 plus years of being king. And he was basically a faithful king during that time. So, and Isaiah would have been born at some point. Uzziah would have been older than Isaiah, so Isaiah would have been born at some point during Uzziah's reign. So Isaiah would have grown up knowing a good king. Like, he would have grown up in prosperity. Uzziah was the most powerful king of Judah to that point in time after the kingdom split, and was the most successful, most prosperous, and was one of the most faithful, at least until his moment of weakness. And that's what Isaiah would have grown up knowing. And, as a young man, as a child, as a teenager, maybe into his early 20s, how old he was when Uzziah died, he would have known, he would have lived in a relatively stable, peaceful kingdom ruled by a relatively faithful king. That's what he would have known. That's all he would have known, because he would have been born during Uzziah's reign, would have grown up in Uzziah's reign, and would have only known that up to this point in time. So it's only after Uzziah dies, or at least the same year Uzziah dies, probably that same year, shortly after his death, that Isaiah is called to be a prophet. Isaiah has now got to put his faith not only in his king and God, but in God. Now Uzziah will be replaced by Jotham, who himself will be a relatively faithful king, although not a particularly successful one. And then it'll be Ahaz who will be the wicked king that Isaiah will have to confront. We'll read about that starting in the next chapter. So Isaiah is gone, and maybe Uzziah had to be gone before Isaiah could become his own man. And I felt that whenever my dad died. It's like, in order for me to grow into being my own man, I had to lose my father. And I knew that. I even knew that before he died. And Dad died when I was 31 years old, 10 years ago now. And I even knew a couple of years before that, as I was reaching the age of 30, that I was going to have to lose him before I could really become my own man. And I think the same thing is true here for Isaiah. Isaiah was going to have to lose Uzziah before Isaiah himself could become his own man and be properly called to be a prophet of God, however old he may have been this time. And he would have been fairly young. Anyway, so, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each covered with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Now, up until now, we have not heard a peep of these things called seraphs. We've been reading about cherubs all the way back to the fall of man in Genesis 3. And God put cherubs on the garden to guard the way back to the garden. The temple and tabernacle were decorated with images of cherubs. The statues that were built over the Ark of the Covenant that extended their wings over the Ark and formed the little seat where God was supposed to be sitting on, figuratively as his throne and footstool, were in the form of cherubs. But now we have these things called seraphs. Somehow or another, the Israelites knew what cherubs were supposed to be, what they were supposed to look like, and what seraphs were supposed to be and were supposed to look like. We get a fuller description of them. We had all the way here in Revelation when we see the throne of God again. This time not in the context of it happening in the earthly temple, but in the throne of God in heaven itself. Revelation 4, verse 1. I looked, after what just happened, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. A rainbow resembling an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbling, and peals of thunder. Before the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God, the 7-fold Spirit of God. Also before the throne was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were four. We'll read about this sea of glass again when we get to Ezekiel, and we'll see the throne of God portrayed there too. In the center around the throne were four living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second an ox, the third had a face like a man, the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the four creatures had 6 wings, and was covered with eyes all around, even under his wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne, and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne, and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. That's another glimpse, I think, into the seraphim, which in Revelation are referred to as the 4 living creatures. The cat is complaining. We see these creatures again in Ezekiel. Actually, we'll see them next in Ezekiel, Revelation, of course, being at the end. And they're carrying the throne of God this time. They're traveling along the throne of God like a moving chariot. Ezekiel 1, chapter 1, verse 4. I looked, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud, with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Here they have 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had the hands of a man. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a man, and on the right side each had the face of a lion, and on the left the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out upward. Each had 2 wings, one touching the wing of another creature on either side, and 2 wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, without turning as they went. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. Okay, we'll deal with the wheels later on. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like an expanse, sparkling like ice and awesome. I believe this is the sea of glass that John talks about in Revelation. And then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I believe that expanse is the sea of glass that John talks about in Revelation. I believe these 4 living creatures are the same as the seraph that Isaiah sees here. We haven't seen these creatures before. We've been hearing about cherubs and angels, but this is the first time we've heard about these things called seraphs. And I believe we get more information about them in Ezekiel and Revelation. You could think of these things as like God's bodyguards. Apparently they just sit around the throne of God and carry his throne around, as Ezekiel describes, and sing praises to him all the time. These creatures represent creation, okay? Creation itself sings the praises of God by its very existence. I have 3 little cats back there in the bedroom right now. You can probably hear one of them meowing. The cats cannot put voice to their praise of God. That's what man does. That's what I do. That's what we're supposed to do as people who who's seeing the praise. Cats could not write this. All right, God chose humans to give voice to the praise of Himself in creation. Represented, for example, as in the writing of this book. Cats did not cats did not write this. My cat can meow. My cat back there is meowing. By her existence, however, she does proclaim the glory of God in her own way as a cat. She was created to be a cat, and by being a cat, by the simple act of being a cat, she declares the glory of God in her own way. She cannot, however, put words to that praise. So creation itself sings and declares the glory of God by virtue of its mere existence. But it takes man, it takes the voice of an intelligent being that God made to put that into words. I believe that's what these things are. Woe to me, I cried. So back to the story. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Now this goes back to when they first dedicated the tabernacle at the end of Exodus and into Leviticus. And the temple was filled with smoke, and no one could enter it. At the very end of Exodus, chapter 40, verse 34, Moses had just got done setting up and dedicating the tabernacle. The last words, the previous words were, Moses finished the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And then in Leviticus 1, it says the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. That's the imagery that's being evoked here. God is filling up the temple with His presence, visualized by this smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So Isaiah is doomed. As far as Isaiah is concerned, he is doomed. He is going to die. He is not worthy to have seen this awesome sight or been in the presence of God. And he's right to say this. He's not wrong in saying this. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. Let's hope I can find this. Let's see. I have my notes. My notes are kind of all over the place. Okay. It's not really all that important. With it, he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. Of course, the thing that actually atones for sin and takes away his guilt is the blood of Christ at the cross. But God knows that's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet at this point in time. That's still 700 plus years in the future, 750 years in the future, but God knows it's going to happen. And on that basis, he is forgiving Isaiah's sin now. And he is representing that to Isaiah by cleansing him with this fiery tongue from the coal from the altar. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who shall go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. Pretty sure God knew he was going to say that, huh? And so he said, Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts or minds, really, and turn and be healed. So he's saying, I want you to go preach to these people, but they're not going to listen to you, they're not going to hear you, and they're not going to understand you. Their eyes work, their ears work, their minds work, but they're going to shut these things off and deliberately turn to their own ways. It's not that they can't understand, or that they can't see, so they won't see. They won't see or they won't understand. So again, go and speak to them. And that's the response you're going to get. Then I said, For how long, O Lord? I don't know if Isaiah is as excited about this as he was a moment ago. And he answered, Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted, and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away, and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be a stump in the land. There will be a remnant. Even after all this destruction, there will be a remnant. That's what we talked about in chapter 5, and we'll be talking about it all throughout the rest of the book of Isaiah, as this remnant that will be left even after the destruction. So Isaiah has gotten his ministry. He has gotten his call. He has seen a vision of the Lord in the temple. He has accepted the ministry of a prophet. He has said, "Here am I, send me." And God is sending him. And he says, "Go and tell this people. Be ever seeing but never hearing. Be ever hearing but never understanding. Seeing, never perceiving." And keep doing that until there's no one left to preach to. Keep doing that until the cities are empty of inhabitants. Now, in Isaiah's time, we don't know when Isaiah died. Judah and Jerusalem will be destroyed completely 100 years plus later. It will actually happen in the days of the Babylonians in the late 600s, early 500s BC. Isaiah, the year Uzziah dies, is 740 BC. The actual fall of Jerusalem is 150 years in the future yet. I think it's safe to say, we don't have Isaiah's death date. We don't know how long he lived. I think it's safe to say, though, that Isaiah did not live to see this actually happen. So Isaiah did not see the complete destruction of the entire country. Now, he'll see the destruction of a lot of it, okay? When Isaiah gets his ministry, the northern kingdom of Israel is still around. It will cease to exist in 20 years or so. Fewer than 20 years, actually. A lot of the Judeans' towns are going to get devastated by Assyria later on. Jerusalem will be spared, but a lot of the cities along the way are going to be wiped out. So he will see a lot of devastation. But he will not see, unless he lived to be 200 years old, he will not see the complete devastation of the entire country, which will happen in the future. But he's basically being told to go and speak this message to people, even though they're not going to listen to it, for as long as there's people to speak to. And someday there won't be. And he's also told right from the start that they're not going to listen to him. And they're not going to hear him, they're not going to see him, they're not going to understand him. They'll see with their eyes, they'll hear with their ears, their senses work. But they're going to close themselves off to him. They're going to make their hearts calloused and make their minds dull. And they're going to close their hearts and minds to his message. And even though they will hear his words, they will not listen to them. Even though they will see him and the symbols and signs he performs, they will not recognize it. And there's going to be a choice of willful, stubborn disobedience and stupidity. And that's going to happen all throughout Isaiah's life. Now, we read in Kings and Chronicles that Hezekiah, who comes along later during Isaiah's time, will oversee a national revival that will delay the fall of Judah and Jerusalem for 100 years. Hezekiah will listen to him. Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, they actually quote the prophecies of Micah and say that Hezekiah listened to Micah. Hezekiah did listen to Isaiah. Some of the others may have too. Hezekiah did manage to get the people to at least, give up some of the outward signs of their rebellion against God. So there will be some revival here. But that doesn't mean, but that doesn't mean that this repentance or this changing of the heart is penetrating down deep into the core of their being. It isn't. And as soon as Hezekiah is gone, as soon as Isaiah is gone, they're going to go right back to doing what they were doing before. And that's only going to continue leading them down the path of destruction. And Isaiah knows this literally from the moment he's called. The first thing he's told when he's given his commission is to go and preach to this people who will not listen to you, who will not see you, who will not understand. They're going to choose not to do this. It's not that they won't be able to understand. It's not that you're going to be speaking in such lofty language that they can't follow. They just aren't going to want to. And they're going to keep, but I want you to keep spreading this message anyway until there's no one left to tell it to. Because someday there won't be. Not a pleasant job. He did this for 50, 60 years. Okay? And it's like that. The life of the office of a prophet is not a pleasant one. No one ever sought to be a prophet. All the prophets were called and commissioned by God. No one ever sought it. No one ever, they did. Some people did want to become prophets, and they became false prophets who just said whatever people wanted them to hear. But the genuine prophets of God, they were all called and commissioned by God independently of their own will or action. Some of them, like Jeremiah, we'll read about later, didn't even really want to be a prophet. And we'll read about Jeremiah when we get there. He had to change his attitude about that, which he did as he got older. But yeah, this was a difficult task, and it was a very lonely, unpleasant lifestyle. And no one ever signed up for it. The man who did perform this function, who did live this life, who did take on this office of prophet, were all called to by God. None of them ever volunteered for this job. It would not be easy. It would not be fun. But someone had to do it, and Isaiah is one of those someones.